Hi everyone, welcome back to another week on the Brush by Brandy YouTube channel. My name is Brandy, and this week we're going to work on this piece that's behind me, and I'm letting you guys see a little bit of the finish, but now I'm going to kind of block it out. This was a really fun piece to do. So the challenge in this one was I was given a set of colors, set of 6 colors, and they were a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but the challenge is to use all 6 colors along with a group of people and see what everybody comes up with different ideas using the same colors. And so I did, but I made this a challenge in actually mixing some custom colors. So if colors aren't in your wheelhouse, or you've got a certain collection that's available to you and you want to reimagine them into different colors, I want to make you guys not afraid of mixing custom colors. And that's exactly what we're going to do this week. I love how this finish comes out. It's a little bit dark, a little bit grungy, almost gothic feeling, and it's right up my alley. So I'm thrilled with how it turned out, you guys. I love some of the colors that we came up with. I think you guys are going to love it too. Stick around and let's get started. Here's where I started on this piece. Overall, it's a really cute piece, and I chose this one from my inventory because it's got a really pretty plain flat front on it, and I'm going to add some interest with a pattern on this one, and so I needed a pretty clean face on it. This piece is in overall pretty good condition. The wood inside the drawers is pretty dry, so I'm going to go ahead and condition this using a furniture salve. And I do this on all the pieces that I refinish. I pay attention to the inside just as much as I pay attention to the outside. This is going to moisturize that old wood and add a light scent, so when these drawers are open, they smell really pretty and nice and attract the customer. This is an important step in refinishing your furniture pieces because a lot of times these have been forgotten and the old wood can dry out, and this is what leads to it starting to crack and warp. And so taking care of all the parts of your furniture piece, giving it an overall spa day when you're doing these makeovers is really important. Look at that wood grain with a little bit of moisture in it, it just glows. So this piece needs to be a multicolor finish. I've got to use those 6 colors that are in this challenge. And so I went to some of my Pinterest boards, and I've had these saved for a while. I love the Harlequin pattern, but I'm going to put my own spin on it. Before I get started on this project, I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about the Annie Sloan mix mat. And this is an amazing, amazing tool. And there's actually a lot of color science that's included in here. So it's got a few different sections. This first section here is for color mixes, where you can use the 3 circles to do color mixes that are a little more complex, that have 3 colors in them and what they end up to. It's got a section here for looking at what are complementary colors. You've got a section for your primary colors, which are a red, yellow, and blue. Secondary colors are going to be your orange, green, and purple. And then complementary colors are going to be what are opposite each other on the color wheel. So this kind of helps you to explain your secondary colors, gives you a guide to what they are up here on the triangle. And then it's got this section here. It's got a section on the back that's completely blank that you can use for just mixing and matching and playing with. And then this mat is extra washable, so it's super easy to use. But I want to show you how I use this mix mat in this project that I'm going to be working on. So Annie Sloan assigned us 6 colors that we can use in this project, and let me show you what they are. I've got Annie Sloan Country Gray, which is a soft beige. Aubusson Blue is a very rich shade of blue. It's got some green undertones in it. Firle, which is this bright green. Barcelona Orange. Emperor's Silk, which is a nice red. And then Emile, which is a very soft shade of purple. And so these were the 6 colors I was assigned to use. And then of course I can use a shade of black. And anywhere I needed a white, I'm going to use Country Gray as my white. And so we can use these 6 colors, and when I first saw them, I freaked out a little bit. This is not really my wheelhouse here, these bright, bright colors, and so I wasn't sure exactly where to start with them, except that I knew this was going to end up being a project about custom color mixes. So let me show you some of the mixes that I used here. And one of the first mixes I did was Aubusson Blue. And if you mix Aubusson Blue with Firle, it gives you this rich shade of teal. And so if I take those and mix them together, let me show you that custom color mix. That's going to be this one here. All right, and so this is one of my first color mixes that I used, was Firle and Aubusson Blue. All right, and next I'm going to take my Aubusson Blue and I'm going to mix that with a little bit of the emile. And so when I take these two and mix them together, I ended up with this really pretty shade of sort of a periwinkle blue. And so this is my mix of aubusson blue and emile. That was my second color mix that I used. For my next mix, I took my aubusson blue again and a little bit of emperor's silk. And when I mix those together, red and blue make purple. And so this is my shade of purple. That was my third color mix. I love this color. This will definitely be another mix that I use often. All right, and so the only color that I've got left at this point that I haven't used is this Barcelona orange. So if I take Barcelona orange and I also mix this with some aubusson blue, and the Barcelona orange has a lot of shades of yellow in it, so I ended up with almost a green because yellow and blue do make a shade of green. And so that gave me this really pretty sagey green here. And that ended up being my last color mix. Now, Annie Sloan did a great job in this project because she gave me the colors that I needed to mix with. So she considered that I would need to mix almost anything. You need your primary colors, which are red. For my yellow, I did use Barcelona orange, but it's got a lot of yellow in it. So I'm going to put it here kind of in between. And then she gave me a blue, and aubusson blue has a lot of green in it, so I'll put it kind of here on my mix mat. So with my primary colors, I can mix almost anything in the rainbow. And then of course with a white to lighten it, which is going to be my country gray, and a black to darken it, I can tint the shades. So for this project, this ended up being a project all about custom color mixes. I've got 4 great mixes here. Again, I've got the aubusson and firle, aubusson and Barcelona orange, aubusson and emile, and aubusson and emperor's silk. And one thing I want to point out is that I did use aubusson blue in all of these colors. And because I've got the same base in each one, it's going to mean that all of these colors coordinate with each other. And so I feel like these all worked really well together. And then of course I used aubusson blue in its full strength because that of course is going to match. And country gray is a nice neutral, so I use that in its full strength too. And that was how I came up with my color scheme for this piece. I'm actually really excited for some of these mixes. I definitely encourage you guys to check out the mix mat and get to playing with some colors. Learning this color science is really helpful. Another great tool to have in your toolbox is a color wheel. And so this is a tool that you can use to help you find complementary colors. What happens if you mix colors together? It'll give you roughly the shades. And so learning color science is really key when you're doing painting, to how to use the colors that are in your arsenal to come up with some really custom colors. Now that I've got my color scheme all figured and kind of my design laid out in my head, I'm ready to get started on my piece. So I knew that I wanted to do a wood stain top on this piece. It had a lot of damage, so I had to sand it down anyways. I might as well take it back to this beautiful wood. I used my Surf Prep sander and started out with an 80 grit paper and then a 120 and a 220, and I was able to remove all of this old stain. While I paint the body of this piece, I'm going to go ahead and cover this raw wood, and I'll come back to it at the very end and put a little color into it. The next thing that I knew that I needed to do is give this body a really good cleaning. It was pretty dirty, so I went ahead and went over it with a cleaner, and then I came back and wiped away any cleaning residue with a water as well. I did remove all the original hardware from this. Unfortunately, I'm missing several pieces and some are broken, so I'm not going to be able to reuse all the original hardware, but I saved what I could, and I'll hopefully use those on a future project. So I am allowed to use a black on this paint finish, and so I went ahead and gave this a base coat of Athenian black. And the reason I did this is because I do plan on distressing down in this, and I want to see some of this black and dark color. I'm also going to use this to frame out my color scheme. I don't want it to be too loud and overt, so I think the black is going to tone it down just a little bit. I'm using a synthetic bristle brush to lay on this base coat, and I'm just going right over the top of my cleaned surface. And I'm using kind of a random brush stroke because I want to create a little bit of texture so that when I distress, I have some uneven lines to distress down to. I did not end up priming this piece, but I ended up noticing later that I was getting a little bit of discoloration in this coat. And so I did come back and spray it with a coat of shellac. I just used a clear shellac from the hardware store. This is going to encapsulate all those tannins in the wood to keep them from bleeding through and discoloring my paint finish over time. So in hindsight, I could have applied that shellac to the bare wood before I put this base coat down, but I discovered that bleed through later, so it's never too late to go back and add a clear primer. Once my base coat of paint was on and it was fully dry, I came back the next day and I'm using a chalk pencil. This is actually a sewing tool, but I'm going to go ahead and mark over the top of my black paint just using the chalk pencil. You don't want to use graphite because graphite pencils can bleed through chalk paint, and so this chalk pencil works great for marking up the paint. What I'm doing here actually ends up being a mistake, and the reason is because I decided this pattern was too small later and had to come back and redo it again. But I originally thought I wanted each of my Harlequin diamonds to be the size of each drawer, and so I measured out so the height of the diamond was double the size of what the width is, and I feel like this is the most symmetrical pattern when you're doing a diamond. And then I marked out my entire front of my dresser, and then I actually painted in all those diamonds, and I stood back from it and I felt like it looked really busy. It wasn't the look that I was going for. So lesson learned, guess what? I get to redo it again. So that's what we always mean when we say it's just paint, right? So I came back and I repainted my base coat of the black over the top, but I wanted to leave that in just to show you it doesn't always work out right the first time. I actually didn't mind having those lines underneath. They ended up looking really cool when I distressed back at the end, but I'm going to remark out my pattern, and this time I actually doubled the size of my diamonds, and I'm much happier with the size of the pattern. It was just too busy with those small diamonds on it. I kept the same basic math, and I measured from the top of my dresser down to the bottom to try to get in as many hole shapes as I could without cutting them in half. And I doubled the size on this, but I kept the same symmetry where the height of the diamond is double the size of the width. I'm using a level to measure this all out so I get nice straight lines and hopefully don't have any crazy wavy lines going across my dresser. Once it's all marked out in the chalk pencil, I can begin painting in the shapes. This looks like a lot of time and a lot of marking up, but it was totally worth it in the end, you guys. I'm really glad I took the time to measure this out and get my dimensions as precise as possible, to use the level so my lines were all straight. It made my pattern work out in the end, and I'm super happy with it. That way you can make all your mistakes in the chalk pencil before you start actually applying the paint to your dresser. Once my pattern is all laid out in the chalk pencil, I did decide that I'm going to paint these all in by hand, and that's because I want kind of a primitive look to this. I don't want taped off edges and for it to be overly clean. I want it to have kind of an old world look. So I'm going to paint this in using artist brushes. It sounds crazy, but it actually didn't take as much time as you'd think. I'm going to pull out the 4 color mixes that I made in the beginning. So along with those 4 color mixes, I'm using pure aubusson blue and pure country gray without being mixed. And using those 6 colors together, I found was the perfect amount to create this Harlequin pattern without ever letting the color touch itself. So that was my goal here. I didn't want it to have a perfectly patterned look, so I placed them kind of at random as long as no color is ever touching itself. I tried to place the colors randomly throughout the dresser so that I had a nice mix and balance between all the colors. I really just use a steady hand and the artist brushes, and I can steady my hand by resting either my pinky or my wrist on the dresser while I drag the brush up, making sure my artist brushes are pretty clean and in good condition. If they're too old and frayed, you're going to get some messy lines. And then I just worked my way from my right to my left using one color at a time. I wrapped my same pattern from the front all the way around to the side so it's nice and continuous. The hardest part was going over any moldings or trim, and that's where I was glad that I chose a fairly flat front piece. Here it is with my original base coat on of just one coat of all the colors. So now it's time to come back and go ahead and apply a second coat of all these colors. And this is where I'm going to really pay attention to cleaning up these lines. Anywhere I didn't get them perfectly straight, I'll correct it on this coat. And I also used really random brush strokes in the center of the diamonds. And that's because when I come back with my dark waxes, it's going to pick up all those random brush strokes and give me that old world look that I'm after. I'd say adding this second coat is totally optional because I did actually like how it looked after just the first coat, and I could still see some of that black paint underneath. So that's also an option if you want to go with that and not do this second coat. So I'm repeating this process just using a steady hand, some decent quality artist brushes that are pretty new, and then I'm just going to ride these edges and get them as straight as possible. Again, if they're not perfect, that's okay because I want kind of a primitive look on this piece. So now that I've spent all that time on this beautiful finish, I'm going to tear it apart. And I came back with my Surf Prep sander and a padded sanding sponge, and I'm going to go ahead and distress through these colors. I want some of that black to show through. I want those irregular brush strokes to distress unevenly. This was a beautiful process. Adding wax is where Annie Sloan paint really comes alive. So I'm adding Annie Sloan wax over her paint, and I'm just applying it with a brush using a circular motion. I'm going to rub it into the paint, let it sit for a few minutes, and then I'm going to come and buff it away with a soft cloth. You can see how much color and dimension adding that wax adds to the paint. It just deepens those colors so much. This is where I could also start to see all that distressing showing through underneath the paint. I could even see some of the lines from the original diamonds that I made, and I actually love it. So happy accidents, absolutely, that was one. When I let that wax set up for just a few minutes and come back and buff it away, it buffs away to this low shine, and it's perfect for this primitive look. This is where Annie Sloan paint really shines. It's absolutely meant for this. Now I'm going to add a little bit of black wax over the top of my clear wax. I'm just adding a really light coat of the black wax, and I'm doing it kind of irregularly, and I'm just using a really inexpensive natural bristle chip brush to add it. I want that black wax to just pick up on all those irregular brush strokes that I added with those artist brushes, and then I'm going to darken areas that I want to focus on, like around these keyholes. Once I add this black wax, I'm going to let it set up for just a few minutes again, and then I'll come back and buff this away to that same low shine that I did on the clear wax. You can see here, especially in some of the lighter colors on that country gray, how that black wax is just picking up all that detail. It's beautiful. A wax finish is also very tactile. Every time I wax, I can't help but run my hands over the top of it just to feel how smooth it is. It's just the most beautiful, authentic finish. I feel like these are looks that Annie Sloan's paint does really extremely well. And when I saw her workshop in Oxford, I learned that that was kind of her vision. Her aesthetic is for these beautiful old world finishes that look really authentic, and it does that really well. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to duplicate here. After this wax is done, I feel like I'm done with my paint finish, only my keyholes were a little plain, so I did mold some out of resin using a redesign with Prima keyhole mold, and I just glued those over the top on those areas. I knew that I couldn't reuse my old hardware because I'm missing some and it's broken, so I did look online and I found a few options and went to the store and picked some. These weren't all available, and when I saw them in person, some of the sizes were off. So now let's come back and pay attention to this wood top. Originally, I had thought that I wanted to do a wash using the country gray so that it was nice and light, but it started taking on kind of this dark old world feel, and I wanted to continue that. So I took the country gray off the top, and I'm going to do a black wash. So I'm using Athenian black. It is coming up a little bit light because it's pulling some of that country gray, but that's okay. It ended up working out great. I'm applying a super thin layer of the Athenian black using some water, and I'm using that diluted coat to almost form a stain using my paint. I did to about the midway point on the top of this dresser. I don't want to go too far because the paint will start setting up. I brushed it in nice, long, even linear strokes, and once I have an even coat on there, I'm going to come back with a rag and I'm going to wipe this away so that the black paint just sticks in the grain of the wood. While you're doing this, you just want to make sure that you keep your paint wet the entire time so that you still have enough time to wipe it back. But you can see when I wipe it back what a beautiful color it turns that wood into. It's got this really charred wood effect. This charred wood look goes really great with the kind of gothic vibe that I'm getting from the front of this piece. I want everything to be a little bit dark and mysterious, and this blackened wood definitely hit the mark. Once I did the first half of the dresser, I'm going to go ahead and do the second half. I broke this into halves, number one, because there is a seam in the wood down the center of this dresser, so it's a nice obvious mark where I could stop. And I'm going to go ahead and just overlap them slightly so there's not too obvious of a delineation, but I'm going to repeat the process doing that black wash on the second half of this dresser. The top on this, I did decide to seal an Annie Sloan clear coat, and I did that because it's going to get more use than the body. So I like a wax finish on the body, but I did decide to use clear coat on the top. This piece also has a mirror that goes with it. So I painted this solid black around the edges of the mirror, and now I'm going to come back with a razor blade and just clean up anywhere that I got paint or clear coat onto the edges of this mirror. I find it's easier to just scrape it away when I'm done than it is to tape off the entire mirror. This piece is complete, you guys. I'm thrilled. This is going to be a hard one for me to let go. I love it that much. This paint is magical when it comes to doing these old world finishes. This was a really fun challenge for me. I mixed up some great paint colors. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please click that subscribe button. You can find links for everything I use in the description for this post. As always, you can find more Brushed by Brandy on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube, and on my website at brushedbybrandy.com.